Good to see so many people joining us today. It is really sunny out, so I do plan on going for a walk later. I'm gonna try to share my screen here. Okay, here we go. All right. Yeah, good morning, folks. So I'm going to be talking to you today about monarch butterflies, milkweeds, and other native plants. Kind of a sprawling talk. You're with me for 45 minutes to an hour. So sit back and relax. We're going to be talking in no particular order, roughly kind of sort of about ecology and evolution of monarch butterflies and milkweeds. The milkweeds of Ontario that I've had the pleasure of working with. And then we'll talk about some of my more current work, which is related to native seed strategies and maybe some things that you can do at home to help these plants. So, Canada is quite biodiverse. It's home to just under 4,000 native plants, and about 2/3 of those are insect pollinated, require an insect or, hummingbird to pollinate them. The rest are pollinated by wind and water to some extent. Some wind-pollinated plants are visited by insects, but by and large, 2/3 of them have evolved to attract and be pollinated by insects. And what's more important, I think, is that plants generally are the foundation of all terrestrial ecosystems, other than the ground itself, rock itself. They are the structural and energetic foundation of all terrestrial ecosystems. So it starts with plants in a lot of ways. And in no way am I a monarch butterfly expert. So today is really going to be kind of a talk about plants and how monarch butterflies relate to plants. But my background is in evolutionary biology and community assembly. So understanding what forces shape the plant communities that we see out on the landscape, how those plants interact with each other over long time, over evolutionary time, and how they interact with pollinators, particularly how pollinators shape those communities. So pollinators are really cool. They're also indicators of ecosystem health. So these are some pictures of rare bees that we found in a restoration site, and these indicate ecosystem health. But monarch butterflies are also indicators of ecosystem health in that they rely on not just milkweeds, but a wide diversity of native plants as nectaring sources to get them through their life cycle and to fuel all of their movement. And so the plight of the monarch butterfly to me is sad in and of itself, but it also speaks to the degradation of our native plant communities and the fracturing of intact, high-quality habitats for these kinds of insects on the landscape. So the story of native plants and monarch butterflies go hand in hand. And I'm not really going to focus too much on the life cycle of the monarch butterfly. I'm sure you're more than familiar. They rely on milkweed plants as a host to lay their eggs. Their caterpillars can only consume the leaves of the milkweed plants, but the butterflies themselves, the adults, can nectar and feed from a wide variety of plants, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So again, I'm sure you're familiar with the monarch butterfly. They've become a bit of an icon for conservation. They're like the panda of insect conservation. Everybody really, I think, would recognize a monarch butterfly or even a monarch butterfly caterpillar if you showed them one. Everybody today in this room, in this virtual room. But I just want to kind of highlight the fact that close relationship between monarchs and milkweed, it's not just special to monarch butterflies. This is repeated many, many times over and over again in the insect community. For example, not quite a specialist relationship, but this native plant turtlehead can only be pollinated by large bees, by large bumblebees, and its flowers have evolved and are specially adapted to restrict pollination only to big, strong bumblebees that can open them up. But kind of further to that, the turtlehead, that little plant there, is one of the few hosts for a rare butterfly, the Baltimore checker spot. So these bumblebees and these checker spots are interrelated to each other. They're connected to each other through their native plant partners. There are other relationships like this. Giant swallowtails can only lay their eggs on a couple plants, prickly ash and hop tree. Uh, there are bees that are specialists as well. This is a Monarda bee, a bergamot bee, and she can only feed her young pollen of wild bergamot plants. And she lives more like a bird than like a hive bee. You know, she has a nest and she packs it full of pollen. And she only travels a few hundred meters in her life, focused on collecting pollen from just this plant. There are moths that specialize to different flowers. So again, I'm trying to show that there's a pattern here in nature. But today we're going to be talking about monarch butterflies and their evolution and how they've become specialized and why they're specialized on milkweed. So milkweed, this is common milkweed in the late fall, shedding its seed. Milkweed is toxic to most animals, most insect. It produces a latex sap, but the monarch caterpillars can eat it. Oops, sorry. And they have specialized to focus on eating this plant. They themselves become toxic because of that, and it provides them an advantage out in the world, making them toxic to eat, for birds and stuff like that. So they focused on, this tight-knit relationship, the specialist relationship with milkweed, which is cool. But on the other hand, the adults are not really specialists. The adults can feed from a wide variety of flowers that bloom whenever they're in the landscape. So late summer, fall, that kind of thing. And I want to talk a little bit about butterfly pollination generally. So adult butterfly pollination. A lot of plants have evolved to be somewhat specialized for butterfly pollinators, but not completely specialized. So they still overall can attract bees and flies and other insects, but these types of flowers have evolved structures that make them particularly attractive for butterflies. And these are large kind of landing pad structures, places where the butterfly can comfortably cling to, escape from the wind, get a foothold, and stick their tongue into the flower. Also, a lot of these plants have very large flowers, very brightly colored. Often they're pink or purple, sometimes yellow, depending on the year and the habitat that they're growing in. All of these plants, I guess the ones on the left, do bloom during the monarch's migration. The one on the right is a little bit early, but all of these plants share those structures. Large, bright colored flowers and a big landing pad. Often they have a tube, even if it's very tiny, like the photos on the far left, for them to stick their tongue into. So a little tubular structure where the nectaries are in the plant and the butterfly can access food. So a large group of plants that attract all kinds of butterflies, including monarchs, is the sunflower family, the Asteraceae. This includes asters and goldenrods, and they bloom, in the late fall when the monarchs are really active in Southern Ontario. So if you're looking to grow plants that benefit monarchs, I would definitely start with asters and goldenrods. But there's other groups of plants that share these flower features too. So again, here's New England aster. At this time of year, this is a smooth aster. I find monarch butterflies most often on purple and pink flowers. I'm not sure if there's research about that at all, but I do a lot of monarch surveys in the fall as part of my job. And when I'm trying to find monarchs just out and about in the Niagara Peninsula, I look for patches of Joe Pyeweed and patches of New England aster, and they're usually there. Just an observation. Again, large pink flowers with a landing pad. This includes blazing stars. There's a few different species in Ontario. The dense blazing star is actually rare. It's a species at risk, but it's pretty easy to grow and it's gorgeous in a garden. Many of you probably already have it. But this group of plants, to me, is not just adapted to be pollinated by monarch butterflies, but I believe that this group of plants has actually fueled the evolution of monarch butterflies in that their migration coincides with the mass blooming of these plants historically on the landscape. So um, if you think of historic populations of monarch butterfly and the numbers of plants and healthy communities that would have been needed to support them, what kind of plants were those communities full of? And I think they were full of blazing stars and thistles and um, Joe Pye weeds. So I wanted to show you a link really quickly. Not sure if I can do this. I'm just gonna, sorry. Um, it's really worth a watch. Bear with me, almost there. So hopefully somebody can give me a thumbs up if you can see that. But this is a native seed orchard production area in the US. Blazing Star, this is Meadow Blazing Star. They have a few videos of these locations, and they are absolutely chock full of monarch butterflies during their flight period. And it's like they're drawn specifically to these types of plants. Another piece of evidence that I have that these plants, Joe Pyeweed, blazing star, native thistles, have fueled the evolution of monarch butterflies is that when there are no native plants on the landscape, the monarch butterflies will seek out plants that most resemble blazing stars, native thistles, and Joe Pyeweed. So I'm going to try to share my other screen again. Sorry for that pause. Okay, thank you. So anywho, I hope that convinced you that these plants are super important to the migrating stage of monarch butterflies, so the adult monarch butterflies. It's not just any native plant that a monarch could use, but I think there are very specific plants that they favor. Okay, let's see if I can continue on here. Okay, and I just wanted to stop here. And so when I was taking photos last fall, I was fooled. And so I just want to stop for a moment and talk about the evolution of monarch butterflies in a different way. Like I mentioned, they are toxic because of the milkweed that they consume. And this has caused other butterflies to evolve in order to mimic the monarch butterfly and be um, left alone by predators. So this is a viceroy, I think. Looks very much like a monarch butterfly. The only difference, or the most obvious, I think, is the extra band, the extra line in the bottom set of wings. Again, I'm not really an insect expert so much, but this one always fools me, especially when I'm out in the fall doing surveys specifically looking for monarch butterfly. I keep getting fooled. So that was just a pause. So be aware. Um, so I'm trying to use some of this kind of evolutionary biology thinking and use it to influence and inform decision makers who are not only planning restoration on a large scale, but also funding monarch butterfly conservation at a large scale. So monarch butterfly has been listed as endangered recently, and we're not quite sure what that means, but surely there's going to be additional funding towards monarch butterfly habitat restoration. And what does that mean? What does that look like? We need to work with the producers of native plants and seeds in order to achieve some of those conservation restoration targets. What does that look like? I think we need to start with a palette of highly appropriate native plants that are not only easy to produce, economical to produce, but are also the most beneficial to monarch butterflies. And many of these, if not all of them, are generalist plants, so they'll benefit other insects as well. So this is just a quick snapshot of a seed mix calculator that I've developed with Canadian Wildlife Federation, including what I call a monarch rank, which is, number one, those are the best nectaring plants for migrating monarchs. It also includes milkweeds. for the baby caterpillars. I can provide a link to this file later, but it does kind of combine several different sets of information to help you create monarch seed mixes. So let me know. You can reach out. I can send you the link for that. Just checking on the time. Okay, so we're going to kind of shift a little bit now. We talked about the plants that can help the adults fuel their flight, but there's also milkweeds that are needed to uh, produce baby caterpillars. So there's a lot of people that are interested in, which species of milkweed are best for caterpillars, what stage, what size of patch. We can talk about that if you'd like, but I think it's more interesting to talk about the diversity of milkweeds in Ontario because there's pretty much a milkweed that's adapted to every habitat in southern Ontario. So pretty much every place that a monarch butterfly could be swept by the wind, it can land and find some kind of milkweed to help it complete its life cycle. So this is a common one, probably have in your garden, swamp milkweed with pretty pink flowers. There are a few other species. This is one of the less common ones. It's a prairie milkweed or Sullivan's milkweed. Looks like a really giant version of a common milkweed with more colorful flowers. It is restricted to the more southwest part of Ontario right now, but was historically found in the GTA. And you do find monarch caterpillars on these plants as well. So I'm not sure if they prefer them or not, but they don't hate them. This is my favorite native milkweed. It's the green milkweed, green comet milkweed. Some people say cornet. I'm not sure if there was a typo or there's just two names. Pick your favorite. There's no really official common name, but this is a tiny little milkweed that's found usually in sandy prairies. And those flowers are open. I know they kind of look like buds, but those are the open flowers. You can see they have the same structure as a common milkweed. That's a better photo of the plant. So this is a population in Norfolk County that I've been monitoring for a while, 5 years or more, and it grows right on the roadside, trying to work with the conservation reserve to grow more of them and with the county to stop mowing them down, which has been difficult. But these are really cool little plants. We have been collecting seed. They're sometimes available from specialty growers, but you might have to give them a heads up that you're interested. So this is another uncommon milkweed, pretty widespread though in southern Ontario. It's the world milkweed, tiny. I think my favorite milkweed for a garden setting. It's very tame and very attractive for all kinds of pollinating insects, including monarch butterflies. It will attract adults, and I have found caterpillars on these plants as well. I couldn't find a photo, but I have seen them. Oh, sorry, I've mixed up my photos a little bit. These are green milkweeds again. I'm just showing the same patch on the roadside I go to every year. There's only about 25 plants there, but I always find caterpillars. So even these rare small patches of milkweed are good homes for new monarch butterflies. That's back to the world milkweed again. I apologize, my slides are a little bit out of order. And then everybody's favorite, I think, is the butterfly weed. So by everybody, I mean every butterfly's favorite. This is a very attractive plant. You can see it from a mile away. Looks great in a garden. You're probably already growing it, but the butterflies love it, including monarch butterflies. And yeah, that's just a photo of the seed pods. They're more narrow and smooth, and there's no bumps on them. They're not very fuzzy compared to like a common milkweed or other species. Like I said, there's a milkweed in virtually every habitat in southern Ontario, including woodland habitats. This is poke milkweed, and it's being visited by a bunch of plume moths here, which is cool. But also the leaf in the front, I believe that's caterpillar consumption. That's my theory anyway. It looks like it to me. but I couldn't find a photo of a caterpillar on these, but I'm sure there has been one. Um, Pretty easy to grow, actually, surprisingly easy to grow, not very common in the wild, usually found in really high quality sort of rocky woods, upland woods, but easy to grow from seed just like any other milkweed. I wanted to point out that there are 4 other milkweeds that have been found in Ontario, although they are very, very, very rare. This includes the large green horsetail milkweed, which is pretty much only at Windsor Prairie, Ojibwe Prairie, and um, I don't think it's ever been found anywhere else. This is from the Ontario's Rare Plant Atlas, these maps. There's also historic and new observations of Avalifolia in northwestern Ontario. Historically, there was world or four-leaf milkweed in Niagara region, where I am right now, but nobody has seen it recently. And then, as of this publication, there was an extirpated species, variegated milkweed that was only found in the Dundas Valley in Hamilton. So people sometimes ask about these. Where can I get them? Should I grow them? And to me, it's sort of leave it for now. I guess it's a novelty. If you want to import it from Michigan or Prairie Moon Nursery or something, there's nobody stopping you. But there's certainly nobody, I don't think, producing these species from Ontario sources. So speaking of Ontario sources, I just want to pause for a moment and say that, um, you know, all of the plants that we buy from our native plant producer start somewhere, and they start from remnant habitats, intact plant communities out in the wild, out in the landscape. This is one that's very near and dear to my heart that has been destroyed recently. It's an ancestral tallgrass prairie in Delhi, Ontario. This is one of the most diverse and largest prairies left, frankly, in southwestern Ontario, and the site of 3 different prairie milkweeds. So keep in mind that the conservation of monarch butterflies is tied to very everyday things like land use practice and planning policy. So inevitably, it's a political issue. But there are, efforts. People are trying to help the monarch butterfly. People are also trying to help rare milkweeds thrive in Ontario. This is just one batch of the green milkweed that we sowed a few years ago. Like I said, they're very easy to grow, just like any other milkweed from seed. It's just that nobody's really helping them. So we need more people growing these seeds. So I'm going to start shifting a little bit to some of my recent work related to seed conservation, and I'll try to tie it into monarch butterfly. And then we'll end with some practical things that you can do at home. So, like I said, a lot of this ultimately comes down to political issues. So what's being prioritized in terms of funding and in terms of policy within government. And unfortunately, plants themselves are being ignored in virtually every sustainable development goal around the world. And this is very sad. This is very eye-opening. Botanists themselves, botanical knowledge is disappearing and blinking out. And that's a problem, not just for plants, but for everything else. As I mentioned at the very beginning, plants are the foundation of every terrestrial ecosystem. They are also key in achieving a bunch of things such as carbon sequestration, maintaining soil fertility, filtering water, providing shade. Oh, and I forgot, feeding us all. So the fact that they are ignored explicitly in a lot of sustainable development goals, I think, is the cause of the problem and why they fail. If you're on social media, maybe you've seen this little meme. Makes me laugh every time because this is the way that I'll say some policy people, but certain sectors think about carbon. They think that there's technology that's going to be more efficient than a tree or a plant, which has had billions of years on this planet, basically, like over 200 million years of plants on land evolving in order to sequester carbon, not to cool the planet, not for us, but in order to literally build their bodies to grow, to reproduce, to form these communities, and to produce all the energy that everything else depends on. So, like I said, this is one of the funnier things on social media. So I like to crack jokes. This is a serious topic, monarch butterfly conservation, the loss of biodiversity. Um, but, you know, I like to find the humor in it. And I think at some point we're going to look back and regret not focusing more on plants, which is why I've included this little dinosaur joke here. I think, now's the time to shift our priorities and to shift our focus to plants and put plants specifically in the foreground. And I would say when you help plants, you help everything else, including the monarch butterfly. Um, and again, I like jokes and I like dinosaurs almost more than I like plants. If you've never seen Jurassic Park or read the book, I actually recommend you read the book first. It is sort of a story about dinosaurs, but it's mostly a story about a botanist that nobody listens to. So when she first arrives on this island full of dinosaurs, she says, they've picked all kinds of poisonous plants and put them around the pool. This whole resort is full of toxic plants. What are they doing? Do they not know that these plants are going to kill us all? And it's foreshadowing, right? For what they think they've been able to do in terms of controlling nature. But to me, it's really a story about how nobody listens to the botanists because, oh, it's just plants, right? Like they're not active, they're not alive, they're not doing anything for us. However, they're doing a lot for us. They are providing us with food and medicine. They're providing us with economic well-being, social well-being, cultural well-being. They're providing us what some people call nature-based climate solutions, ecological goods and services, which include habitat for other animals and plants. Um, the conservation of plant diversity itself has an inherent value, and so maintaining the biodiversity of plants in Canada is really important to all of us. And of course, our landscapes would not be as beautiful as they are without native plants. So we have convinced federal government that this is a problem, and they've for the last year and a half supported us in a framework for not just native seed conservation, we've called it a native seed strategy, but really native plant conservation generally in Canada. And it was our goal to address the issues that are limiting the sustainable supply of native plants and seeds to help us achieve our restoration targets, including restoring habitat for monarch butterfly. Um, and so, like I said, we've spent the last year and a half, we've worked with over 250 different plant policy restoration experts and partnered specifically with Carol Indian Canada to develop a seed strategy for southwestern Ontario. And in doing so, we had to make a very clear case that, oops, sorry, these native plants are not only tied to all kinds of individual and ecological benefits, but they're tied specifically to commitments that the federal government has already made related to green economy, related to Indigenous leadership and conservation, related to species at risk recovery, which will now include monarch butterfly, including the 2 billion trees program that you may have heard from. And the point is, they've made all these commitments without looking to see whether or not Canada and the restoration economy in Canada can actually achieve any of these things and actually grow the plants, grow the seeds, and do the work needed to restore the landscape. And a quick scan through similar work around the world finds that a lot of these restoration projects, again, are ignoring plant diversity itself. So, plugging a tree in the ground counts as restoration sometimes. Sometimes you don't get many species of trees either, let alone grasses and herbaceous wildflowers, things like that. So again, we were trying to understand how to put plants into the focus. We spent a year engaging, like I said, with some sector experts. We had a public interest survey to understand not only what people's limitations were, but also what they would find most helpful and strategic towards their work in native plant restoration. I'm not going to go through all of these. I just wanted to note we did develop, it's currently 16 draft recommendations back to the federal government, things that they can invest in, partnerships that they can support, things like that, in order to increase the amount of native plants that Canada can produce. This includes things like a comprehensive market research study. We need to understand where native plants can be restored, where there is a demand on the landscape, and who is going to grow those plants, including which species of plants, like specifically which communities are we restoring. And it also includes a line on species at risk plants and plants that support species at risk animals. So we had monarch butterfly in mind there, but there are other examples as I've kind of hinted to. So one of the major outcomes again of this process is the mismatch between funding timelines and kind of the government funding cycle and the cycle of restoration and the cycle of growing native plants. So it can take up to 4 to 5 years to grow a bulk quantity of native plant seeds. So you need, more than a handful of seeds to restore an acre, let alone 10 or 100 acres. So in order to scale that seed up, you really do need to farm it agriculturally. And this takes quite a bit of planning, quite a bit of expertise. Pretty much at every stage of this production cycle, you need a different set of horticultural, botanical, agricultural kind of skills. And that's lacking from the sector. And there's also, like I said, kind of poor planning. There's this mismatch between this production cycle and how governments anyway procure seed, how they purchase seed and request it. And this is a quote from one of our strategy participants. How can we plan for the next generation or the next 7 generations if we can't plan 5 years down the road? And I couldn't agree more. So what we need in particular is the ability to scale up our sources of native plants. So this often includes the creation of seed production areas or seed orchards or seed farms, whatever you want to call them, to complement and to offset the impact to wild populations. So certainly we will still rely on wild populations to do restoration, but that puts a lot of pressure on them. And so as a first stage in restoration, we need to create these highly productive, highly diverse, local sources of native plants. And in doing so, you're not only creating, restoration material, seed to do restoration, but you're creating really high quality habitat. These are shots from the St. William's Nursery where I used to work. And every year the greenhouse was full of monarch butterfly caterpillars because we grew so much milkweed and didn't, use any pesticide on those seedlings. So these orchard spaces are multifunctional. They are in and of themselves, they are restorations, but they're also highly productive for native plants. There's just a fun shot for me that's over a decade ago now, harvesting a little blue stem. We grew a lot of milkweed, had to clean it sort of in industrial ways. Most efficient way we could find was using a shop vac. So I can walk you through that process if you're interested at the end. But yeah, it's a farming of native plants, basically. So a lot of the approaches to scaling up native plant seeds are similar to the production of corn, really, or wheat, or any other agricultural seed, except that the plants themselves are perennials. Sometimes you have to plant them in different configurations in order to prevent them from kind of flopping over or to get them to be most productive. But at the end of the day, it's basically farming native plants communities and seed for restoration. And it's not just common plants used in restoration. These seed-based approaches can be used for rare plants, as we've demonstrated with the green milkweed. I'm very pleased to say that I've recently become involved in 2 different seed-based efforts to create new populations of species at risk. So one is the Virginia goat's rue. There's really only one population of this plant left in Norfolk County, but we now have permits and a team of people. The seeds have already been collected, actually, so to grow out these plants, and they will be transplanted into a handful of other locations as well as their original habitat. So that's the first time that this has ever really been attempted officially for this species in Ontario. Same habitat, similar plant in that it only really has one scattered population in Norfolk County, the bird's foot violet. It has been, folks have been working on recovering its habitat using controlled burns and invasive plant removal, but this is the first time that there will be a concerted effort to collect seed, propagate plants, and to create new populations nearby. So I'm going to start wrapping up a little bit soon so we can have some questions and stuff. This is a species at risk plant with a now species at risk butterfly. So again, these things go hand in hand. The life of the plant is tied to the life of the butterfly. And I'm sure you all love butterflies and monarchs in particular. So if you're not already, I would encourage you to track all of your sightings, post your photos onto iNaturalist. There is a special monarch butterfly project on there. You can search. I believe that's the best way for citizen scientists in this region to get involved in monarch butterfly observations. So please do get involved next season. And I also want to note that some of my other colleagues at Canadian Wildlife Federation are working on monarch butterfly projects in your region. So please do reach out to Vicky. She coordinates a restoration program within the Greater Toronto region that's funded in part by the 407. And this is to create monarch butterfly and other pollinator habitat in communities near the 407. So if you live in this catchment area and have a restoration program or project in mind, do reach out to Vicky. There is funding available. There's all kinds of technical support and advice available. We will even help you purchase the right seeds from local producers. So if you'd like to talk about milkweed propagation or anything like that, I'm very prepared to do so. But if you have any other questions, I'd love to hear them. I'm going to wrap up the presentation now. I think that's the main portion of the presentation. Thank you very much. That was really fun to talk about. And I look forward to chatting with you.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And we do have some questions already in the chat. So I don't know if you have access to that or if you want me to read them out to you or.
Do you mind reading them out to me?
Sure. Okay, so first question, can we get that restoration seed calculator? So some interest for that.
Yes, absolutely. I will put together an info package with links, some of the links that I mentioned, including that one. And I'll send it
To me, and then I'll
Yeah,
send it
sure.
forward
Okay. To the whole
through
group.
yeah, there will be a follow-up survey afterwards, and I'll include all of that. Second question we have is, how is it possible to have incentive programs for all nurseries to sell appropriate native plants and also repercussions for nurseries selling invasives/cultivars? I'm not an expert, but people don't know they're causing harm with non-natives. How do we partner with municipalities to get rules in place? That comes from Alexis.
Yeah, a couple questions there. So in terms of incentives for the growers to grow native plants, they need some sort of market signal, market demand. So they're either going off of previous year's sales or, what looks good in what's trendy, what are people talking about. But the other way is a lot of these incentive programs are funded by government at some level. So I think the government, the people who are generating this demand ultimately have an obligation to interact directly with the industry that's growing these plants. So that's not happening. And the types of incentives um, that are going to benefit the growers, um, that message needs to come from them to the people providing the incentives, which are usually ultimately government. I hope that answers that part of the question. Um, in terms of discouraging non-native plants, I think education is the best way to go because um, short of some like invasive plants, I'm not sure that banning plants is going to happen anytime soon. In terms of garden centers not selling them, I think um, yeah, I think I would just ask the garden centers why they're making those decisions.
Definitely. Yeah. Uh, Thank you. So we've got a question from Patricia here. So should we deadhead milkweeds in a smallish suburban yard and remove the seed pods? Does it help the plant at all when we don't have room to allow a massive self-seeding?
No, I wouldn't do anything. If you're finding that your yard is being overrun by milkweed seedlings that you don't want and are not sustainable for your space, by all means, pick those pods off, maybe give them to a friend, find a seed exchange locally, go on a walk, toss them over, a railing. Um, yeah, I don't think it really helps them to deadhead them.
Okay. Is it true commercial organic seeds are grown without pesticides, etc., but non-organic classified seeds can be grown with all sorts of fertilizers and pesticides? So organic seeds should produce more robust plants.
I am not an expert on organic certification, so I'm going to have to pass on that one.
Okay. Yeah. Uh, we've got questions. Anelia, there's one here for you from Nancy. I don't know if you can see that one.
Hmm. Oh, okay. So yes, I did get your email. I'll respond to you, Nancy. We're happy to share resources about where people can, just purchase native plants. And we at Oakville Green are having a native plant sale launching at the beginning of March. So stay tuned for more information. And all of these plants in our supplier are local as it could be. So thanks, Nancy.
Perfect. And then any tips for keeping rabbits and other critters from eating young Leastris?
I think a little fence or a rabbit might help. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the suggestions is a wire garbage can from the dollar store, and I agree with that. The
Yeah.
dollar store is actually a great place for some of these DIY solutions. And that's all the questions we have in the chat. So if there's anybody who has any questions they wanted to ask out loud, I will now allow people to unmute themselves and ask those questions if they have any. Of course, be mindful of your fellow participants.
Daniela, I also wanted to mention that we just received the news that we will be partnering with Rights of Way Pollinator Habitat project. So we'll be working with Vicky, and we will be receiving some support for our Kingsford Pollinator Pathway project. So we are super excited about that, and we look forward to supporting not only monarch butterflies, but all pollinators with that project, enhancing that project. So stay tuned for volunteer opportunities. We will be as soon as probably mid-May, we will start returning to our sites and we will need more volunteers. And it's a great educational opportunity too, just because we love talking about plants. So once we are at the site.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think one last question came in here. Do all milkweeds need cold stratification?
No, actually. Common does not. So there are two types of dormancy. There's sort of like a physical dormancy and a physiological, think of it like a biochemical dormancy. So common milkweed actually doesn't have a dormancy. It just needs light and moisture to germinate. Some milkweeds do need a short cold stratification period, but in my experience, none of the ones I showed photos of need more than 3 weeks. So yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. And it doesn't look like we've got anybody interested in verbal questions. So with that said, I think it's a great time to wrap up and check out.
Awesome. Thanks so
Yeah.
much, everybody.
Well, thank you so much, Stefan. That was very inspiring. I kind of feel like I would like to go outside and do something right now in my yard. But thank you so much. Lots of great information. So we're very thankful for your participation today.